Welcome to the Indomitable podcast. I'm your host, ciruolo, and today we have another great episode that will leave you inspired. Today's guest is the indomitable Isabella Young. 15 years ago, Isabella escaped from the messianic cult after her son was murdered to prevent the cult leader, her husband, from being exposed as a pedophile, rapist, and con man. Once she escaped, she focused on spending time in nature, expanding her consciousness, healing emotional wounds, learning about cults and mind control, and freeing her mind from cult programming. Well, goodness. Hello, Isabella. I am so grateful to have you here today.
Good morning, Di. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to share what I've learned from my experiences with you and your audience.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. Okay, so before we get too far off course here, can you fill us in on a little bit of anything that I've left out?
I've been through some extremely painful and difficult situations, which I've written about in some of my books. And I've learned from these experiences. And that's one of the things that I'd like to share is that while it's been very painful, and I spent a lot of time actually wishing that I wasn't here on Earth. The further I've gone in my journey, the more I can feel the value and the richness and the deepness and it's really the expansion of consciousness that's happened while I've gone through these experiences. And so I've now got all this information that I really need to share.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking forward to sharing that today. So
Excellent. Awesome. I'm so excited. So, okay, why don't we just sort of start from the beginning? How did you come to be a participant or a member of a cult? How does that start? What does that look like?
Well, firstly, no one joins a cult.
Right.
What happened?
I've heard that before. Yes.
What happened was that I actually thought that I was joining an ashram with my guru. But that was far from the truth. So what led up to that? Well, I was raised a devout atheist. My mother she had this attitude that anyone who believed in God or was religious was a lesser person, actually like almost mentally ill.
Mm-hmm.
And so I grew up with this superior attitude that I knew better than everybody else. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s when I met a man who became my first husband, and he gave me some books to read, and we went to meditation together. We did a tantra course together, and I suppose that was the start of my spiritual awakening. And once that happened, that became my focus, and it always has been to learn more about is beyond what the five senses. You know, there's a much bigger world out there that we can see, hear, taste, touch, or smell. And we started a life together, and I was living my dream, which was to live on some land and be self-sufficient with horses and animals. And I was 3 months pregnant with our second child when he died suddenly, which completely destroyed my world, destroyed my dreams, you know, the dream of having a family, and it just went in a moment. And there was no way I could live on the farm by myself with 2 children. So I had to let that go. I was lost. I was really lost. I ended up meeting another man who was putting himself forth as a spiritual teacher. And through some coincidences and synchronicities, he invited me to come and train with him in America. So I left my children with my mother. She said she'd look after them, and I came to America and started training. Well, I was really just living in his home there was other people there. He was, by this time, he was putting himself forth as a guru, and he actually said that he knew me better than anybody else, and he would be able to help me fulfill my dreams and my goals as a spiritual seeker and all that. And we got married, and I brought my children over, and we started living together as a family in a home in Southern California in the cul-de-sac. You know, it looked like a normal family home, but really it was the main home for the ashram or the cult. Mm-hmm. People coming and going, all of that, and living a life with the children. They were going to school, and living their lives, and I was the wife of the guru, and it was hell. It was really hell. He has a narcissistic personality disorder, and so all the life revolved around him and what he wanted us to do. Everything was controlled. What we ate, what we read. Everyone had to be, vegan, and we were all busy with cult activities, transcribing his discourses and trying to get other people into the cult, because that's his main source of money was through tithing. But, I thought I was serving a mission. I wanted to make the world a better place. So I was actually being brainwashed.
Yeah.
Now, when I look back on it, there was mind control.
What year was this happening in?
I met him in 2000.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I'm imagining it's further back in time than it is. Okay. So, wow, 2000 in Southern California. Okay.
It's in Southern California. And it still seems like a long time. It's taken me a long time to be able to speak about this experience, because
I bet
if we didn't fall in line, if we didn't speak respectfully, or if we didn't finish the task, or there were punishments handed out, and he especially punished my children. They were given lines to write, or they were grounded, or phones were taken away, all that sort of stuff. And that was to
punish you.
Punish me, yeah.
Right.
So fast forward, one day my son came home from school, and he was really upset, and he didn't want to talk about it. So I said, well, let's sleep on it. And in the morning, he was gone. He left the house, and couldn't find him, and called the police and reported him missing. And then the next day, the cult leader had sent out his assistant to go and look for him behind the house, and he was found dead. And he had apparently taken his life with a knife from the house. I lost my mind. And he blamed me. He said because I wasn't an obedient disciple, and hadn't given my son the life his soul had called out for, it was my fault. I was a bad disciple, a bad mother, a bad person. And yeah, I was broken from that. I couldn't see straight. I couldn't think straight. And now I look back on it, I can see it was a staged suicide. And he had staged it and taken my son out because my son was going to expose him as a pedophile. He was grooming my son. We found this out later because there were other young boys in the cult that he groomed. And I didn't know any of this at the time. I was just, I just wanted to die, basically. And I went to see, I knew I needed help because I had children and I couldn't take myself out because I had other children to be there for. They were going through their own hell. So I went to see this man who'd been one of the cult psychologists, in addition to having all these sessions with the cult leader and like disciple trainings and satsangs and all this. We'd had to go and see and also a kinesiologist to help us with our growth and evolution. So I went to see him, and I walked in the door, and he said, you're in a cult, don't you? And I said, no, I don't know I'm in a cult. I thought I was in an ashram with my guru. And he said, go home and Google all the characteristics of a cult, which I did. And of course, I could see it all. I could see the, charismatic leader who believes he's the arbitrator of truth, and, the mind control, and the psyops and the gaslighting. And I realized, yes, I am in a cult, and I've got to get out.
What was that experience like? How long did that take you? Was that just like an overnight thing? You go and you Google it and you come to that realization? Or was that just like, did that happen over time? Did you sort of deprogram, or at least come to that conclusion over time?
That happened as I was Googling it. Wow. As I was going through that checklist of cult characteristics, everyone's check, check, check. And I thought, yes, I am in a cult.
Wow.
And I've heard people say, don't say anything to people about when they're in a cult because you'll just drive them further into the cult. Don't tell them they're in a cult. But if you know people are in a cult, tell them
they're in a cult.
Yeah. In a cult. And that's part of what I'm doing now, because I can see like the bigger cult that's enslaving people. So it was in an instant. But then I had to get out because he was threatening me. He told me that of course he was. I wouldn't be able to take my children.
Sorry, I have to ask the mom questions in my mind. How would you not be able to take your children with you?
Well, we had one I've skipped a lot, gone
No,
really
I
quick.
know. We go backward.
We had sex one time, and
Mm-hmm.
I got pregnant
Of
and
course.
gave birth to a daughter.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so, because he was her biological father, he
Right.
was not going to let me take her, whereas my other child was from my
Mm-hmm. Right.
first marriage.
Right.
So
Of course.
I wasn't really able to fight back
Right.
as much as it seems like I should have been able to.
Right. When you're dealing with a narcissist, there are a lot of ways that they make it seem like it was your fault. And especially from the outside, I think a lot of times people looking in will say, well, why, how could you not do more? How could you not, why didn't you leave? I think I think that's the secret underbelly part of being a victim of that kind of abuse. It always seems like from the outside that you had more power than you had, because on the inside you're constantly being fed that narrative that you are nothing without them, that they could take everything from you, and you live with that fear constantly, right? So I don't think that you could have left any time and you should have done more. I feel like you were going through something that is absolutely not something that a lot of human beings go through, and it's not an experience that everybody has. It's not fair to judge at all. It's not fair to look at that situation without all of the pieces. So I'm sorry, continue. Just to be clear, I was not thinking that. I was not thinking do more. I grew up with a narcissistic foster mother, and there are still kids in that family that haven't left. There are still people that are still, imagining that her reality is the reality that they all live within, and they all live in this same fear of the world, this fear of outsiders. So I think, no, I relate very much, though it was not a cult.
Well, I actually now understand that my family was my first cult. My mother
And
had a
yes,
narcissistic personality disorder.
right. That
And
is often the case. I was going
yeah,
to get there, because we choose what we're comfortable in, not what we're safest in, not what we're happiest in. We choose what we're comfortable with. So I was very curious, and that was going to kind of be my next question. So please take us there.
yeah, she was an extremely evil woman and triangulated me and my brothers, so we had no relationship.
Of
I was
course.
the scapegoat. I was the
Yes.
black sheep,
Yes.
and she knew I was in a cult.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
she went with my dad. They never did anything together after they got divorced, but they did go along to see a cult expert a year after I left Australia. Now
Mm-hmm.
it was 8 years after I left Australia before my son was murdered. But
Right.
he knew, my whole family knew I was in a cult. So
Right.
no one did anything, said anything, yet they all had the money. There was like 5 lawyers in the family. They had the wherewithal to have got me out, or at least say something.
Right. Right.
And I actually think there's part of her that was enjoying the fact that I was suffering the way
Right.
I was.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you don't know, if you're not the type of person who comes from that background, when there's a narcissist that's sort of keeping people apart, there will be a scapegoat in the family, and then there will be golden children that
Oh
will be
yeah.
treated like gold, that will be treated like just absolutely the way we would expect children to be treated. And the narcissist will make they will make the scapegoat the person who is at fault for their own abuse, for their own lot in life. And it will look from the outside as if that might be the case, right? Because, of course, it can't be that they're a bad mother, because all of their other children are being treated like gold. So the community will see that, and the people around them will see that. And anytime they question or challenge the narcissist is able to point to the golden children and say, well, see, of course, I am a good mother, and this must just be this bad child. And it's very often a girl child, let's be clear. They will point to the scapegoat and say, this is their fault. They are bad. It is not that I am bad. They deserve it. And then when you have other adults outside in your community wherever they exist, they are reinforcing that you deserve that behavior because they believe the narcissist. And then inside the family, the golden children do not stand up for you because they are afraid of receiving that same treatment. They have to go by with it. So, of course, you don't end up having relationships with those siblings. The narcissist has made it that way on purpose.
That was well said. Thank you. Yeah, so I ended up with a wound of codependency.
Of
So I'm
course.
looking for love outside myself, and that I
Yes.
was so vulnerable to
Yes.
a cult leader.
Yes.
And
Yes.
yeah, it's so interesting being able to see the patterns play out in
Yeah. I
first
mean,
my
you
family, then
you
the
chose
cult, and
somebody that was I mean, even both times you chose a man who was, who considered himself a guru, right? And your mother was like an avid atheist. I mean, like it wasn't just that you went that way on purpose because it was the opposite of her, right? You chose the opposite way and you still ended up in the same place with that kind of abuser because that's what you were comfortable with. And that's really the disservice that continues to keep on giving when we have these types of abusers. It just keeps going until you break that cycle.
yes, because the patterning didn't end even after I left the cult. I still had
Yes.
that. It took me a long time to even understand the narcissistic, codependent
Yes.
dynamics, and
Yes.
then to heal from my lack of self-love.
Yes.
Yeah, so I went through
Yes.
other relationships after that with narcissists until I finally realized, okay, enough. I need to
Yeah.
establish self-love, because
Yes.
that's the armor against narcissistic abuse.
Absolutely it is.
Awareness.
And treating yourself the way you treat other people
Yeah.
is definitely the way you get to that place, because you don't realize that if you don't do that, you pass that on to your children. And I'm not saying did. I'm saying that that's something that you see happen quite a bit, because it's not just your behaviors that your children are picking up on. It's how you move in the world. It's the things that you avoid. It's your fear of situations that you pass on to your children, because if they don't know why you're avoiding those things, they are going to be fearful and avoid them as well. So if you are not capable of that sort of self-love, they can't be capable of that sort of self-love because they haven't seen that demonstrated. And it's the worst part of this, honestly. It's not even just that you repeat your patterns of abuse, it's that you pass down your patterns of abuse if you are not breaking those cycles.
We can see that around us, how that
Yes.
multi-generational trauma just keeps building and
Just
building and
keeps
building.
going. That's exactly
Yeah.
right. Yes, we continue to plow that same path over and over and over again, and we don't see why our outcomes aren't any different, right? So if you have like a kid who hated his parents because they did X, Y, and Z, and then that person does X, Y, and Z when they raise their own children, then their children don't care for their parents. It's like over and over and over again, unless you say, I'm not traveling this road anymore. I'm not willing to do this anymore. I love myself more than this. I love my children more than this. That it's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again and
Mhm.
expecting different results. That's what ends up happening in these generational trauma situations.
The wounding that kept happening, particularly between mothers and daughters in my
Yes.
family, and just saying, okay, no more. This is not, not going to have this happen
Yes.
anymore. It's really sick. And I know how much it hurts, to have that
Yes.
fractured relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And sometimes I'll look at my own daughter and I'll see that she's a tiny version of me. And I know, and I've seen other mothers around dealing with their daughters, and sometimes they can be overly judgmental, but that's because they're looking at themselves, right? They're looking at things that they outgrew or tried to hide or don't like about themselves in a smaller version of themselves. And of course, they're going to attack that and they're going to do more harm. For me, though, when you are healed, it looks very different, because I used to hate my thighs, as an example. But once I saw them on my daughter, I was just like, I am gonna eat these chunky thighs, right? Like I'm like, and that's when I really was able to have more self-love around those things. When I saw them on somebody I just loved more than my own life. So it's very much a difference between being healed and loving yourself, because that's what's at the root of healing, right?
Mm.
And just hating everything about you because that's what your mother passed down, you know? No, you're absolutely right.
That's beautiful. So I wanted to go back to the point where I left the cult.
Yes, please.
because it took some time after I realized I was in a cult to get out. He was
Of
telling me that
course.
I couldn't leave without my child, and he also used the spiritual reasons that if I left him, I'd be leaving my life path. I'd
Right.
be turning my back on God, and when I left this earthly plane, the universe would reverberate with my screams when I realized what mistake I'd made. It just felt like hell to be there. And I think he actually finally let me go. It took about 8 months after I said I need to leave. I think he let me go because otherwise he would have had another death on his hands,
Right.
because I just couldn't stand there any longer.
I mean, sometimes abusers let you go because it takes more effort and energy to control you than the benefit it provides them, right? He's not getting that narcissistic supply anymore from you. He's being reminded of what he's done, right? And I'm sure that very much came to be a part of it, right?
Well, also I was in his way, really. We were in a celibate marriage for 8 years. He told me that, well, he'd just make up excuses all the time. I was too needy. I was too much like a man. I didn't deserve that type of attention. I'd been disrespectful. And then the one that he just kept on going with for the longest time was that celibacy was for my highest and best. My spiritual evolution was going to go a lot faster if I was celibate. But meanwhile, he's grooming the young boys. He's having sex
Yes.
with the men in the cult. He's out there hooking up with randoms all the time. And I was really in his way because he's a sex addict. And there was me. I was, making him accountable for his time and all things like that. So I was
Yes.
also in the way of him being able to live how he wanted to live, being pampered and pleased and have all his needs met. So I suppose you're right. It was easier to let me go so he could get on with his cult business and
His cult. Yeah.
he could
Yep.
do that.
Yeah, I
So
mean, I got thrown out under much the same circumstances. It took much more energy and effort to control me while I was in the family, sowing the seeds of disloyalty and discontent by my very existence. So yes, that happens quite a bit. And suddenly, yeah, you're out.
you're
How did
right.
that go?
I came to Hawaii to live, and that's been the key to my healing
Right.
because, well, just being here is healing. Being in the
Yes.
nature and being in getting in the ocean, and
Yes.
uh, I can feel how it's healed my heart being here. I've been here for
Yeah.
like 15 years now, and I've still got a ways to go on my journey, but I'm
Of
not
course.
suffering the way I used to. I used to suffer all the time, and I used to feel like a victim. Like, why is this happening to me? I'm really connected. When I say connected to nature, I'm
Yes.
stay physically connected to nature all the time to
Right.
receive the energy. I stay balanced that way. I sun gaze every morning and receive the sunlight into my
Yes.
eyes, which is the most transformative practice that I can recommend to anyone. But I can just tell you from experience, it's transformative. I don't feel like a victim anymore. I feel empowered.
Well, you're also
I've,
driving your own spiritual vehicle now, right? You're not
yes,
receiving your spirituality through a person that is going to warp it toward their own benefit, right? You are literally connected to your own spirituality through your practice. I'm very proud of you for that. Not
thank
everybody finds their way to that, right? Like a lot of times people will stay stuck in their cycles, people will stay stuck in their patterns. And even as you talk about, oh, well, I used to feel like, why is this happening to me? I must be being punished for something. What instead of living in that forever, you chose yourself and you chose to love yourself. And that is what got you to that place of being able to receive that love, right? I think that's beautiful. And I'm so happy for you that that is where you got from where you were, because that's not easy to do.
thank you.
Of
And
course.
that's what it has been for me, is receiving the love, because that
Yes.
nature's constantly giving
Yes.
love and life force energy,
Yes.
and so now I'm able to receive that.
Yes. Yes.
I use the word God. I use the word God because when I was younger, I would spit that word out with all the hatred that I could, and now
But
I've had to turn
again,
it
that was
around.
that was another person that was standing in between you and your spirituality for their own benefit. Those were the connections over all of those big experiences, was somebody standing in that place and telling you what it meant to be there. A lot of religions stand in that place between you and the creator, however you imagine that, just to control you, the person. I've been studying religions for such a long time. It's about you. It's about the kingdom of God is within you, right? Like that's always been what it is. But over time, we have seen so many bad actors come in and try to take that spot. Oh, you need to come through the church. And I'm not saying this is all churches or all people or all anything, but it's sort of that same abuse cycle, right? If people came to churches to become healed and were in fact healed, they wouldn't need to stay there. So we see a lot of times churches be the place that people are being abused in, or they are going through those same abuse patterns and those same abuse cycles.
There's religions that control people, keep people
Yes.
fearful and
Yes.
disempowered
Yes.
and controllable.
Dysregulated, destabilized,
Yeah. And then,
afraid of other people that aren't like them. Yes.
right, divided.
Yes. Divided, which only benefits people who need people to be divided so that they become
Right.
the only source of information.
And I could see that it was, so there's the religions that were keeping people controlled, and there's
Mhm.
politics. That whole system is another way to keep people controlled,
Yes.
disempowered, divided.
Yes.
The education system that brainwashes people and keeps people living basically as debt slaves, ignorant
Debt
of really
slavery.
the
That's a very interesting topic that millennials especially are talking about nowadays. That experience of being told that they needed to go to college, and then the generation that came before us told us that that was good debt, right? That those things were going to help us achieve more in our lives. But in fact, we're all in this cycle of maybe working jobs that we don't need to be doing if it weren't for the fact that we were in debt from these choices.
you're having to earn money to live. That
Yes.
keeps people busy and distracted from what's really important, which is our own spiritual growth and evolution. There's no time for
Yes.
that. People
Yes.
are
Yes.
too busy, too
Yes.
stressed.
Too
And
afraid. Fear is the mind killer, right? We keep people so afraid of each other and just the world and all the other things that are happening. We're
yeah,
constantly keeping people fed on a diet of fear and division. I am hopeful that we are seeing a lot of positive change happening as well, even though we're being forced a diet of like the fear and oh my god, everything's terrible. Like we're also seeing a lot of positive change as well. We don't want to be enslaved to these systems
no,
that keep us scared and not well fed and all of those sorts of things. I think that that's very true. So
right.
tell me a little bit about your books. You have 2 books. Who are they for? Why did you write them? Where can people get them?
Well, I've written a few books, but I'm not. I wrote one that's calling my cult classic. When I was in the cult, I had
Yes.
don't ever buy that. But the one that I published in December 2020 is about what's happening to humanity, how we're
Yes.
enslaved, giving people information like don't fall for that. It's a false narrative and extremely
Sure.
dangerous narrative.
Right.
And then it's called, I'll show you it. It's called Putting on the Armor of God, and that's available on Amazon. So what I
Yeah.
basically summarize in that book, that the solution to our predicament is reconnection to ourselves, to
Right.
God, to nature, and to each other. I also offer a vision for the world that I'd like to live in, because
Yeah.
one of our greatest powers is our imagination, our visioning. Because
Yes.
thoughts create reality. And then my next book is called New Human of New Earth, and that's hundreds of natural medicines, body technologies, spiritual technologies that are inherent in
Mm-hmm.
our being. So that's what my next book's about. Is basically it's a remembrance of how to be human, right? Because we're
Oof.
being just drawn away from that with now people just live life looking at a screen,
Of course.
which is really one of the most disempowering, dehumanizing things that we can do.
Absolutely. How do people work with you? How do people reach out to you? And how do they get your books?
Putting on the Armor of God is available on Amazon. I
Mm-hmm.
haven't published my next book. I'm in the process of editing that, and that too will be available on Amazon.
Excellent.
I have a YouTube channel called Feeling Better Naturally,
Awesome.
where I share natural medicines and also I share the beauty of nature that surround me, because even appreciating images from nature can be beneficial.
Absolutely.
And then I have a website called Feeling Better Naturally, and that has my artwork and more videos and some of my writing about the importance of sunlight. Lots of practical medicines that
Yes.
I share through these platforms that people can use to really become more empowered.
I love that. I love that you're putting that love and spirituality back into the world. Isabella has sent me those links, and they are below in the show notes right here if you would like to connect and follow her. Y'all, thank you for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the Indomitable podcast for more incredible stories of humaning. Remember, my new book, Indomitable, A Foster Care Story, is available wherever you get your books and is currently 5 stars on Goodreads. So thank you to all of my Indomitable friends who came to visit me on the road last week, and thank you for sharing your stories with me. And finally, as ever, I am so happy to have you here in community with me. And remember, together we are truly indomitable. Have a great week and take care, everyone.